You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host, Lucy Norris, and on this week's episode, I sit down with founder of headstuff.org and the podcast studios. Starting out as a budding writer and having dabbled in the world of comedy, this guest created Ireland's largest podcast network, rolling out 30 shows with millions of downloads. What began as a passion project quickly spiraled into an award-winning cultural outlet that continues to grow in popularity. From his very own city centre studios, I found out what it's like to be Alan Bennett. So welcome, Alan. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
I think before we speak about Headstuff or the podcast studios, I want to go back a little bit further and ask you how you got into the media industry in the first place.
I went very much the long way around. I did a lot of different things before the way I see it is I did a lot of different things before I kind of put them all together, which became what Headstuff is. So in college I did fine art, studied painting, which I haven't done since. And while I was in college I started doing stand-up comedy, and after when I was finished college then I was in the Students' Union, and then when I was finished that I did a little bit of travelling in Europe, and then I did a master's in creative writing. And it was after that master's that I set up the website. But I think there was certain experiences I got from each of those different things that sort of helped to build up a sort of, what would you call it, somewhat multifaceted cultural website and podcast network, and eventually studios and all the different things.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And did you always, like as a kid, were you always creative, kind of interested why you chose to do a master's in creative writing?
Yeah, I suppose I was, I would have been creative. It's kind of hard to pin down. I suppose I got into little phases and tried lots of different things. I'd get very interested in something and then, be all about it for a little while and then maybe move on to something else and be all about that. It's interesting, actually. I just read a book called Range by David Epstein, and he kind of, the whole thesis of the book is that, the sort of the 10,000 hours rule. I'm sure you've heard of.
Mm-hmm.
To get really good, to get to the top of your game or something, you need to put like 10,000 hours or something and just focus on one thing, be laser focused, and spend all your time doing that and thinking about that and getting as good as possible. Well, the thesis of this book is that that's actually only in very rare circumstances is that true, and in reality, having what he calls range, which is doing lots of different things and getting experience from lots of different kind of areas and places, like completely different, I suppose, like walks of life or disciplines or anything like that, actually helps you solve problems easier and come up with ideas that people who are just laser focused on one thing can't come up with because they have nothing else to bring into it. And so I obviously wasn't doing any of this on purpose, but I read the book and it's like, oh, okay, this all makes sense. And so, my childhood, I was always, I suppose, doing different things, interested in different things. I would make things or draw or write. I always found writing somewhat, I don't want to say easy, but it kind of came to me more naturally than, I suppose, like learning stuff, like doing maths or anything like that, or in the sciences. I'm very interested in science, but learning formulas and things like that didn't really suit me. It took me kind of a while to realize that. I never really had very good English teachers, but so I never focused on it or anything. But it was after, I wrote one good essay in school that I kind of remember, and then I went and did fine art, and then I started writing in college. And it was kind of after that and after doing comedy that I realised that the part of everything that I was doing that I liked doing the most was the writing. So then I decided I'll do the creative writing master's.
And how was comedy for you? I think that's so interesting to have had a little bit of a career in stand-up comedy.
It is, I suppose. When did I start doing comedy? Probably 2005. And it's a little bit different now because there's so many comedians. There's like tons of them, and there's tons of comedy clubs, and I suppose there's the stand-up comedians, and then there's tons of other comedians who are doing, just YouTube videos or Facebook or things like that, and they're all comedians. But I suppose when I started doing it, YouTube wasn't, Facebook was only a year old. It was only still in America. I don't think we had it here. YouTube, I think, started somewhere around then as well, but obviously it wasn't very popular yet. So, and there wasn't as many people doing comedy. There was like a select few, I suppose. Not to say that I was like ahead of a curve or an elite or anything like that. It's just that it wasn't as big a thing. There was very few comedy clubs, so it was actually hard to get gigs because there was obviously a few comedians, but not that many clubs. But I made a pact with a friend of mine who's one of my best friends, and we were in college together. It was actually him that told me I should do comedy. I had a book that I used to write jokes in, or I was just writing stuff, I suppose. I was just writing things down I thought about, and I let him read it, and he was like, "You're writing jokes here. You should tell these jokes on stage." And I actually had never thought about it. But he was interested in animation, and he had kind of an idea in his head to make his own animated, short film. So we made a pact that we were in college, and over that summer I would do stand-up comedy and he would make his animated film. So I held up my end of the deal and did a comedy gig, and he never made that film.
Oh no!
So I hold that against him forever. So I did that comedy gig, and it went well. There's a comedy club in the Halfpenny Bridge Inn. I'm not sure if you know it. It's a few nights a week now, but there's one. It used to be on a Tuesday. I'm not sure if it still is. Called Battle of the Axe. Okay. And it was like an open mic night kind of a thing, but you had to book in. You couldn't just stand up when there was a slot. You had to. You wouldn't get a slot for a month or two, Mm-hmm. But it was a sort of competition. So most Irish comedians kind of their first gig was in this place, Battle of the Axe. And so mine as well was there. I did my first gig there, and I won the prize, which they call the Lucky Duck prize. So that obviously gave me a sort of a taste, and then I kept doing it. And I mean, it's an interesting world, and I had a great fun, and it went pretty well, and I won kind of some competitions and did some tours around Ireland and that kind of thing. But my heart was never really in it, I suppose. It was at the very start, but I didn't. I wasn't mad about being in like lots of different pubs every night, and in clubs and all this kind of traveling, or I suppose the lifestyle just didn't suit me. And I wanted to focus on writing, so I stopped doing the actual performing side of things.
And so once you stopped comedy, did you go straight to set up head stuff, or did you do something else after that?
No, after I stopped comedy, I actually stopped comedy twice. I kind of came back and did another tour with Maeve Higgins, and then I stopped. And then I started the Masters in Creative Writing, and as part of the Masters, you would do a thesis. And when it's creative writing, when you can do a few different things. And what I chose to do was 3 chapters of a novel as my thesis. And so when college was finished, I finished writing that novel, and then I sent that away to various agents and publishers and that kind of thing. And it can take a few months to hear back from them. If they're interested or anything like that. So it was during that time that I set up the website. It was kind of almost a personal sort of blog. The idea was that I would place any bits of writing that I wasn't using in the book. You've heard the expression like that you're only really using the tip of the iceberg, but the bottom half of the bottom 90% of the iceberg is all the research you did and all that kind of stuff. So I was thinking I might use some of that stuff and just put it on this website. So the topics you see on the website are just things I was interested in. That was like the range, of things I liked, like literature and history and science and film and music and comedy, humor. But then actually before I launched the website, I started asking friends, because I had a lot of very creative friends from being in, creative writing and art college and comedy, if they would like to put anything up on the site as well, or if they had any stories or articles or even artwork and music and that kind of stuff. I used to put everything up. I actually put up a few of my friends' theses and things like that, and as articles right at the very start. But yeah, there was a lot of people kind of interested, and then I started getting submissions from other people, and it just kind of took off in a way that I wasn't really expecting. I suppose there was something like a gap in the market for that kind of a thing, and it started taking more and more of my time. And then I actually got some interest in the novel, but I never got back to doing the kind of the next level of edits. So that's sort of my plan at some point, is to get head stuff to a position where I don't have to focus on it as much, and then I can start writing again.
And when you set up the website, was there kind of a business plan in the back of your head behind it, or was it purely just a space for you to be creative?
At the very start, it was just a space to be creative. I never thought of it as a business or anything. It took a while for that. At first, it was a place for me to be creative, and then it was a place to showcase, like fairly quick, like actually before it even launched, it was a place to showcase other people's work as well as my own. And then pretty quickly, I realized that there actually wasn't somewhere you could put this type of writing. Like if you're just interested in writing about history because you're interested in history, not because it's linking to something happening now, like you might get in, a newspaper or on some of the other websites, or you wanted to write about, science, or you just wanted to write a humorous article about something. There's not that many options for writers, especially writers that are sort of starting out or just trying to, cutting their teeth or anything like that. So then the website became kind of about that, just trying to be a platform for all sorts of creative people and give them a platform, give them a voice,
And I guess with everything, everyone's dream is to turn their passion into their career. But then obviously there's that big thing of money that sits in the background.
Yeah.
So how did you begin to monetize the site to make it something you could spend all of your days doing?
It took a very, very long time. So yeah, it was a very, very long process. I think the number one thing is being able to live very frugally for a while, for me anyway, and for this business. I never had any investment or anything like that. I never had there was never any big bank loans or anything. It was just my own sort of sweat and blood, and a lot of help from friends and acquaintances, people I've kind of got to know through doing head stuff. A lot of people kind of put in a lot of work and helped me out in lots of great ways. But there was never really an influx of money into it. So for probably like 4 years or 5 years, I had to just work as hard as I could and make like no money, which most people won't do. I'm lucky in that I don't have a lot of outgoings. I don't spend a lot of money. I'm happy to live just on the kind of bare minimum. So I could survive on the dole for a while, and then as money started trickling in, I could get off the dole and just survive on what was kind of coming in. How did I actually go about monetizing the site? The site still isn't all that monetized, really. Like there's ads on the site now, which I was kind of reluctant to do for a while because I don't really like the way website advertising works. That it's such a small amount of money. It's like you get a couple of euro per 1,000 visits. That I think it kind of undervalues websites and undervalues digital content and how much value people actually get from reading kind of well-written articles. We were never doing sort of clickbait stuff. We were never putting up pictures of cats or videos of whatever, people falling down. We were always kind of putting up considered work. So I always thought that the advertising model was sort of very much undervaluing the work. So I was trying to get sponsors and trying to get people to sort of invest in or give money to the site so that we could promote their brands in a more sort of wholesome way. That was sort of the plan. That plan didn't really work out, as not for lack of trying. It was hard to get people to do that when they could look at our websites and pay it on the CPM model, which is a few euro per 1,000 visits. It was a pure numbers game. So eventually I kind of put ads on the site. I found a third party that made it a little bit more reasonable. And the site, washes its own face now and pays a couple of expenses, but it's not where it's not what pays the wages of the staff here. That all came with podcasts. So it was probably a year into the website when I started doing the Head Stuff podcast, which was my own podcast, just kind of about, like, it was very much linked to the website. So the types of people that we might be writing about, or might even be writing on the website, we would talk to them. Anyone that I thought was kind of interesting or creative, or had something in particular to say, or was doing something that people might enjoy, I would just kind of chat to them. And yeah, it was soon after that I found I really enjoyed making podcasts and listening to podcasts and that kind of thing, that we decided to start a network. And that's when we got closer to, I suppose, where we are now. So we make most of our money from making podcasts.
Mm-hmm. And then can you just talk to me a little bit more about that network and kind of how you grew it? Because I think it's really interesting that at the time, that was in maybe 2014, kind of like around then, that you founded the site, was it?
Yeah, I think it was February 14. Yeah, 2014.
I think podcasts, well, just from the outside looking in, if you didn't know anything about the industry, it looks like podcasts only kind of exploded in the last 2 years, maybe.
Yeah.
But you were obviously doing it before that. So
we're so cool. Yeah, way ahead of everyone.
You're ahead of the curve.
Well, I think, I suppose there was kind of a few podcast explosions, which is why it can kind of seem like you're ahead of the curve when you're not really. I don't think of us as particularly ahead of the curve. And I think we got in early. That's true, but I think the first podcast explosion was long ago, when I think there was the Ricky Gervais show. I can't remember what it was called, but they were making a podcast. It was Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, and they had Carol Pilkington on, and he was, I think, like, supposed to be the producer or something, but the whole podcast was basically laughing at him.
Did you ever see that program, An Idiot Abroad?
Yeah,
with him
so he kind of became famous after all of this, but this was from the podcast, I think.
Oh, was this before?
Yeah, okay. It was before that. And they animated it then, so they would have the voice recordings, and then they would put kind of nice animations over the top of it. But there was a lot of people listening to that, but I can't even remember when that was. It was before, like, iPhones and things anyway, so people would have had to listen to it on iPods. A lot of people listened to that podcast, but then it sort of died down again. And the next podcast kind of explosion came with the iPhone, I suppose, because now you could just have a podcast app and download podcasts directly onto your phone, or even stream them. You didn't even have to download them, so that made it vastly easier. And so podcasts kind of were steadily gaining, and there was a few popular things like This American Life. So I don't know if that was an explosion, but like a kind of a steady rise. And then Serial happened, which everybody listened to, and that was a real explosion, because that was something that people talked about. Like, have you heard Serial? In a way that was outside of the podcast world. So if there was a podcast that you and I liked, we would talk about it, but we're two people who already listen to podcasts. Serial was something where I could go to, my sister who never listened to a podcast and said, have you heard Serial? And she'd say, no, what is that? It's a podcast. Oh, okay, how do I get a podcast? And then she would listen to it and loved it, and talk to other people about it, and show them how to download a podcast. So that was the real explosion. That was the kind of start of, I suppose, where we are now. I don't know when that came out, probably 2015 or 16, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know the date, I think.
But and it's been a steady rise. It's just because people are making such good stuff. It's better than most other media at the moment, and there's so many people who are making them and putting out really good things. So there's something, no matter what you're interested in, you'll find a podcast on it. And there's such high production things like Serial, and S-Town came fairly soon after that, and there's like Radiotopia and all the Gimlet podcasts, and all over the place. People are just putting a lot into making brilliant podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how does your network work? So do you kind of, I don't know, do you come up with the themes for shows and then get people to come and do them, or do you see things that you like and then approach them and kind of ask if they want to be part of the network, or how does that come about?
Yeah, all of those ways. It happens in a few ways. So sometimes we come up with an idea, we think we should have a podcast about something, and then we think about how it might work, and we approach somebody who we think will be a good host and see if they'd like to do it. So that's one way. Another way is somebody might have an idea for a podcast and they would come to us with the idea and say, this is how we see it going, this is like the first few episodes ideas and how they're going to host it and all of that. And if we like the idea and we think that that person should have a show and they've got something to say, then we'll help them make that. There are shows that are already being made and then they ask to join the network, or shows that are already being made and we approach them and see if they'd like to join the network. I think that covers all the bases pretty much. So yeah, that's all sorts of ways. There's no one single hard and fast rule, you know.
Mm-hmm. And then, so obviously we are sitting in one of your gorgeous studios in the podcast studios. How did this happen? How did Head Stuff go to owning your own studio?
So we were making we had the podcast network and we were adding more and more shows to it, and then we started making podcasts for people that weren't on the network. Well, first we started renting. We had our own studio for upstairs in the same building, actually upstairs, for just making our own podcast network shows. It was just my office and there was a microphone in it, and then it became mostly a studio and I had a desk in the corner, and then we were making more and more shows, so I just moved out of that room altogether and I was like, that was the studio, and I had an office next door. And then we started renting out the studio to people who weren't on our network but just wanted to use the space, and then we started editing their podcasts, and so that was really the business then. It was like making podcasts for companies and brands and whoever, and we were doing more and more of that, and then I suppose I just saw the opportunity to increase all of that. It wasn't that, you know, demand was so high that we had to do it. It was more I suppose a field of dreams sort of a thing. I don't know if you get the reference. It was you build it and they will come. I saw that this space became available and it was already a purpose-built studio, and we just turned it into, as opposed to a music studio, we turned it into podcast studios, and hoped that it would be so good and so nice and people would like coming here and making their podcasts that it would all work out, I suppose. And yeah, it was working out and is working out, but we're in a very strange time now. I'm not sure when this podcast is going to go out, but if it's any time in the next few months, I'm sure people will know what I'm talking about, COVID-19.
Yeah.
It's a little bit strange at the moment because obviously people are staying at home and trying not to go to places like studios and restaurants and bars and things like that. So yeah, but mostly people enjoy the studios and are happy to record their podcasts here if they've got a budget for that, and we've set up things like memberships and different things, different packages to help people if they're making an independent podcast and they've no money behind it. It makes it a little bit easier for them to actually make their podcast here, because I suppose one of our key ideas or values from the very start was to make it easier for people to make high quality podcasts. I suppose there's always been the thing that anybody can make it. If you have an iPhone, you can put it on the table and just record two voices and it's a podcast, as long as you put it out. But it's not so easy to make kind of high quality, much better sound quality and consistency, and have like support of people who kind of know what they're doing and technical skills and all that behind the whole thing. And that's still one of the things. We still want to help people make really high quality podcasts, and not everybody can afford the sort of top rates. So we're still, people can still get in touch, and if they can't afford our normal prices, we'll do our best to help, So, yeah.
And then I guess just from your perspective, going from being such a creative person and working in the industry kind of as a personality in the creative world, what was the challenges that you faced kind of when you were moving more into the business side of things, and you kind of had to think a bit more practically and compromise maybe on a few things to make it work as a business? What did you struggle with the most in that transition?
I'm still struggling with a lot of it. I'm not I'm kind of a strange fish in that I'm creative person, but I've always found myself starting business-like ventures somehow. I don't really know why that happens, but even when I was younger, I was always interested in offices for some reason. My partner Aisling always one of her favorite stories from my childhood is I got a desk for Christmas because I wanted to like play office.
Okay.
And I used to set it up like upstairs at the top of the landing, and like I wouldn't let my sisters pass unless they, did something officey. I don't even remember what it was, but and then in college we started a comedy club, me and Mikey, that same friend from earlier, and that I got a lot of experience actually because I emceed or hosted that comedy club. It was actually a really good comedy club. It was one of the best comedy clubs in Ireland at the time. We used to bring comedians over from the UK and various other places. I was going to say Canada. We had a lot of Canadian comedians, but I think they were all probably based in the UK. But that was a little business. Now, we ran it. It was like every 2 weeks. We charged money in. We paid the comedians. It was all kind of done properly. But I was good at setting those kinds of things up and making sure crowds came to them, and it all balanced. That we could pay all the comedians that performed, and we didn't make much. We didn't make any profit really. Any sort of extra money we made off it, we kind of put back into making the branding nicer, or we did a lot kind of for the audience. It was never supposed to be a money making venture necessarily. We would do things like have like milk and cookies at the break, so we'd always go and buy litres of milk and lots of packets of cookies, and we do other things like that to make it a really nice experience when you came to the shows. But looking back on it, it was a little business. And then in the Students' Union, I was the president of the Students' Union, so that was run like a business. We had a budget and we had to make sure we had enough money to last us the whole year for all the events we wanted to do and anything we needed to put out to all the students and all that kind of stuff. But I always made sure that when we were doing something like say Rag Week or Freshers Week or something like that everything made a profit. Like it was to be run properly. It wasn't like, oh, we're all students here, like let's just throw on something and people will have fun because they're drinking. We always tried to do things really properly. Now again, it wasn't a money making venture. Any profits we made went to charity, but we really wanted it to be run properly. So again, what I was saying earlier is all these different things I did kind of gave me experience on how to run things, and that gave me experience, one, in managing a budget and running it like a business, but also in managing people. So a lot of creative people, and in our college, I'm sure you can imagine, creative people aren't always the easiest people to manage.
Yeah.
But as I'm sure you know, but I suppose I learned a lot about it doing that, and since. So that led to Head Stuff. So again, I've set up a business-like thing. At the start, I didn't mean it to be, and I didn't make probably the right choices right at the start to make it a sort of a well-functioning business. But over time, I realised what I kind of had to do, and we changed some things, and now it's run as a very, proper above-board business. But I'm not good at doing all that stuff myself, so I don't pretend I am, and I don't. That would be very stressful and a lot of pressure for me to be very good at everything, like running accounts and making sure we had all the right, whatever licenses, or we were compliant in every way, or we were paying the taxes and all the insurance and all that kind of stuff. I'm not good at all that stuff, so I have people who help me. We kind of outsource accounting and HR stuff, and I suppose that's one of the key things I've learned over time is nobody's good at everything. So get people who help you who know this stuff. So for the first few years, I had a friend of mine help me with the accounting stuff. She's an accountant and she was really good at that. And I had other friends who were good at website stuff, so coding or the back end things. I'm not a web developer. I don't know how to do that stuff really, but I've learned some stuff over the years, obviously. But I never. I suppose when I come to think of it, in any part of what Head Stuff is, I'm not the best person to do any of it. It's just about having the right person there, and knowing who the right person to call is. Mm-hmm. And my skill set is obviously making podcasts. I do a hell of a lot of editing of podcasts, but is trying to kind of keep the whole thing together and make sure there's the right people in place for any sort of, challenge we might have, or knowing how to get a team to work on a project or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. And as we were discussing before, we were kind of saying how it seems like everyone has a podcast these days. I don't know if it's because of
it's great,
social
isn't it?
Yeah, makes it so easy. I don't know if it's because of social media that everyone kind of thinks, oh, the next thing I need to do if I want to be an influencer or something like that is have a podcast. But do you think that kind of a mentality of jumping on the bandwagon with something will cause podcasts to have a shelf life, or do you think they'll always be there?
I think both of those things could be true. I think those podcasts, the ones where people are jumping on the bandwagon, or doing it to be an influencer, or even getting into it to make money, I think a lot of those are going to have a shelf life, because those people aren't really passionate about doing it, and they are doing it to get numbers or to whatever it might be, to sell a product or something. But if they don't love the podcast and they don't do it for, I suppose, the right reasons, they'll eventually get bored of it. Or if they see that, their numbers are growing for the first while and then they start to plateau or go down, they will probably give it up. Whereas the people who love it and are passionate about it don't really care that much about the numbers. Obviously, they want to see them go up. Everybody wants to know there's more people listening, but they're doing it for the love of the podcast. They're doing it because they talk to people that they find inspiring or interesting, or they're talking to their friends, and it's a good time to hang out with them. And if people like listening to that, then that's just a bonus as far as they see it. Overall, I don't think podcasts are going anywhere. I think they're getting better and better. I think, as I said, the cream is rising to the top, and even all of the thousands and thousands of really, really bad podcasts out there, people are listening to them. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to affect what podcasts are at the top. And more people will find and share the really good ones. And as far as I can see, podcast continues to be doing a better job than radio is on all things audio. And it's becoming more and more accessible, and more people are knowing what they are. More and more money is coming into it. So that means the big companies are going to keep making podcasts, and there's going to be more, I suppose, companies like the Gimlets or the Spotifys or even Apple Podcasts, things like that are putting more money into podcasts because, like, why wouldn't they at this stage? It's just getting bigger and bigger. So yeah, I can't see it going anywhere, but definitely a lot of podcasts will stop creating content, but as a genre, I don't think podcasts are going anywhere.
And apart from the obvious influence that COVID-19 will have at the moment on business here, what does the future hold for Head Stuff and the podcast studios?
Well, hopefully everybody gets through this COVID-19 thing. In fairness, I think the government are doing a really good job at the moment. It's quite nice to be proud of the government, kind of for a change. But I think they're doing a really good job. It's normally, we can poke fun at all the other governments and be like, oh, look how they're handling this thing. But this is quite an interesting time because every government is dealing with the same thing. So we can put our leaders kind of in stark contrast on the same issue with each other. And not to get political or anything, but I think Leo's, like, when you stand here, like the speech he did the other night, when you stand that beside what Boris Johnson's doing and what Donald Trump is doing, it's like worlds apart. And I thought it was quite nice. I was quite proud. And the Minister for Business and people like that are, sending emails to businesses, and there's a lot of supports. And if you have to, lay off staff or reduce hours, there's supports there for the business and for the staff. There's lots of benefits, like VAT payments don't have to be put in on time, and there's loans to be there's increase in loans and longer gaps between repayments and reduction of interest and all this kind of stuff, which is really helpful and will probably help a lot of businesses get through this. And we're obviously doing as much as we can to be flexible and adaptable and do what we can to keep getting new business in and reducing costs during this time and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think most will get through this, and as long as people kind of work together and at the moment self-isolate, flatten the curve and all of that. In future, we've got lots and lots of ideas for what we what we hope to see happen. We've always had lots of ideas. So I suppose it's funny because I come up with tons of ideas all the time, and most of them will never happen, or they will happen and they fail completely. And every now and again, one of them works really well, like say the podcast network or opening the studios or something like that. But for any of those different things, there's lots of stuff that just didn't happen or just didn't work out. So I want to keep working that way. I want to keep coming up with ideas, keep doing things we're interested in. Down the line, if we can open more studios, if we can make more and more podcasts, if we can make podcasts like, I suppose, stuff that the Americans are sort of making, the kind of the big narrative-based or investigative sort of things.
I love those. They're so good.
Yeah, there's so many. Like, if we could make something like Radiolab or something, just like, obviously the budgets aren't here yet, but we're hoping that they will, and we're doing what we can to sort of convince people to put a big budget into making a podcast. But that's sort of the next step, and hopefully we can do something like that soon. And yeah, just keep trying to be as good a little business as we can,
Mm-hmm. So I would also be interested to know, for you personally, and I guess in terms of your business, what does the word success mean to you?
I never really think about things in terms of success, which is probably not what you want to hear on this podcast, and it's probably not what people normally say. I've honestly never really been motivated by money or having a lot of money or anything like that. Success to me, I suppose, is first of all being able to survive doing something I enjoy doing, which I suppose I have succeeded at so far. But like, not making a lot of money or anything. Like, I'm not highly paid or anything. But money really isn't everything. It's sort of being satisfied with your day-to-day life is much more valuable than having a really big bank account. So that's quite satisfying. Being able to employ people to do things that they love doing, that was, to me, one of my biggest feelings of achievement, I suppose. We now have, there's 4 full-time staff and 1 part-time and a very regular freelancer. So to be able to help those people, pay their mortgages or, feed their kids and do all of that while being happy at work and not dreading going to work and making podcasts, which is what they like doing, that felt like that feels like a big achievement, and hopefully able to do more of that if we can, if we can grow our business to employing many more people. I mean, as you know yourself, there's so many people out there who really enjoy making podcasts, but it's hard to work in it. It's hard to actually, make your bread from it.
Yeah.
So if we can create more of that, I'll be very, very delighted.
And then finally, if I put your 10-year-old self where I'm sitting now and you had to give him one piece of advice, knowing everything that you know now and having been through everything that you've been through, what would that be?
I would say just try everything. As I was talking about Range, read that book Range, first of all. That was a bit mind-blowing to me. It was very, very interesting. So yeah, I think what I've learned from that book, and if the advice is to come from me, is what I've done so far, it's don't focus on one thing. If you're interested in lots of different things, try and give time to all of them. Learn from other people, talk to people as much as you can, and bring knowledge from one thing into something else. So if you're struggling with some sort of challenge in your podcast, there might be a lesson. You might just be thinking about it in terms of the podcast. What can I do to make the podcast better? But there might be a lesson from what you did on a camogie team as a child, or from how you handled 2 of your friends fighting in school or something like that. There might be something completely seemingly irrelevant to your podcast or whatever else you're doing now, that is actually really useful. So I think, and just kind of persevere. You know, there's going to be people out there who are telling you it won't work, or they might not even like kind of very explicitly tell you what you're doing won't work. But there will be a lot of people that when you tell them what you're trying to do, they'll look at you and say like, "Oh, great, you know, good luck with that."
I've definitely had the kind of, nice.
Very, very cool. And when you're finished with that little hobby, come back to me and, you know, let's talk about what your career is going to be.
Yeah.
A career can be anything in this day and age. You know, the world has moved so fast that the so-called stable jobs of before may not be that stable, and there's going to be hundreds of different types of jobs and people working in different ways, and there's more and more people probably than ever working for themselves. So if you've got a good idea and you think it's going to work, then give it a good hard shake. Don't just, don't look at people who say that's going to be too hard or you need to fall back or something like that. I would say kind of give it a good try. But also, if it's not working, or if there is good advice to be taken from somebody, try and be open to that as well. If something isn't really working, then you have to be flexible. You have to be able to adapt and try new things, which I suppose is what happened with Headstuff. It started as a website, and I kind of no plans for it to be anything else. I thought, this is a website, and if it's good enough, we'll be able to survive and make the website big and employ staff. But in reality, that didn't actually work out. The website is still there, and I'm still proud of it. It's still really good, and I don't want to stop it or anything. And hopefully, it will get big enough to wash its face and pay a couple of staff. But if we hadn't sort of adapted into making podcasts, then we wouldn't be here now, and the website probably wouldn't have survived at all. So you got to be kind of quick on your feet as well.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
No problem. Thanks very much for having me here in your beautiful studio.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, rate, share and leave a comment if you like what you hear. Any interaction would really help so much, as it means I can continue collaborating with incredible guests and creating episodes that hopefully stimulate and motivate you all. I'll be back next week sharing more inspiring stories, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luce.